I shared once before that what appreciation looks like in my marriage is that when I've had challenges or conflict, the worst day I've ever had in my life was all melted away as I walked through the door in the middle of a week and to open up the door and I smelled my favorite food, chili beans, hot water cornbread, and fried chicken in the middle of the week and say to my wife, well, what happened? What's going on here? And she said, I could hear it in your voice. I knew that you were having a difficult time when you just called to say hello. That's appreciation. Wasn't connected to anything. Hi, I'm Dr. G.L. White, and welcome to the Dr. G.L. White Show. I'm the father of three daughters, and they're all daddy's girls. I think the truth of the matter is that every man wishes that he had sons in his youth, but by the time he's older, when he has health issues, that he'll wish that he have a daughter. So that's a blessing for me to have all daughters. But then again, I have eight brothers. And so I've had the opportunity to raise girls and be raised with a bunch of young men. But there was a question that was presented to me about not having sons and what it was like, just to raise daughters and not have a son. And it was a very interesting question that was presented to me. And then they asked that if you had a son, what advice would you give him in terms of everything that we see in society today? And it's a very worthy question. When I began to really think about it, I always start with doing some basic research and looking at Black men and looking at relationships and marriage. And I was shocked to realize that in truth, that the US Census showed that 33%, 33% of Black men compared to 52% of Black men tend to be married. And that's an eye opener when you begin to look at it because it starts to raise some questions. And then I saw that 32% of Black men tend to delay marriage compared to white or Hispanic men at 30%. And so now I began to see a trend that if I had a son, the question that I was posed and trying to understand that would really push me to look a little bit more. And then I looked and said, well, what about the educated? And then I saw that Black men who are educated are more likely to get married than those who are not educated. And so if I had a son, I would find myself pondering with several of these questions because I had to push, and before I could even go there, I would have to raise the question of what are some of the causes? What are some of the reasons that young men today decide to delay in getting married? And that's a good one because when I start to talk about the advice, if I had a son, what I would tell him to look for, well, I have to begin to understand a little bit about the hesitation. And so looking at it, I discovered there are a number of causes or reasons why men will hold off or delay in taking that step of being married. And there's a big difference between being married and in a relationship. So being in a relationship is one thing, but taking that big step of being married, well, that advice to a son would be completely different to the advice that I would give if he were just dating. So then I started looking and I see that some men hold off on getting married. And this one is logical because of economic instability. We're in a time where Black men tend to be the last hired and the first fired. And so when you look at the instability, I can understand why some men may hesitate to get married. But when you really think about it, in relationships in general, and you're talking to someone who's been with a college sweetheart for 37 years. And I've learned that there have been times in all these years that we've been economically stable, and there's been times in all these years that we've been unstable. And so the stability piece, again, is something that if I had a son, I would tell him he would have to learn to get comfortable with, certainly develop a plan. But when you marry, you become one. And so I would say to my son in that regard is that, when you become one, you don't look at your emotional or your financial well-being as an individual thing. It would be a matter of how you two move. And it's important, too, to understand her views about stability and instability. Now, another cause that I've seen where men are hesitant about taking that step, and that's just when you really look at some of the common concerns that many women, especially educated women, will say that a lot of our Black men happen to be unavailable. That can be related to mass incarceration for some. And so that's something that can certainly be as an issue, but not really for those who are really taking that step. So if I had a son, then of course he wouldn't be incarcerated, but that is one of the delays that we've seen in terms of what hinders men. If it's not incarceration, it's their legal standing. So one of the things that I've also noticed that causes some men to hold off on that is if they've already had a child and they're dealing with financial issues like child support and other things. These things too can cause someone to hold off on getting married. So that economic piece, the incarcerated piece, but then we see that some men delay in taking that step too. And this is important is, we want to be in a world where you're evenly yoked. So we've seen now in a time now that women are becoming far more educated and are more likely to complete college than our Black boys. And so some of the delays, as the research has shown, is that there's been some disparities in the education. And again, education is not the be all that end all, but it is one of the causes of delays of why some men hold off. They're pursuing their education or they're pursuing their career. Now, that's not to say other groups are not doing the same, but we really see this as one of the delays, right? So I'm setting up the need or the issue or the conversation if I had a son, what I would talk to him about. But these kinds of delays or these types of issues will hinder the growth and development of that relationship onto a point of marriage. And so we have to take a look at them. We have to begin to examine them. Historical trauma is another piece that tends to get in the way. Now, what is historical trauma? Well, it's just that. It's just understanding the history of Black men and African Americans in general in this country, and the impact that has had on our psyche, our relationships, our trust, the impact on the Black family, what we've seen, and some of the challenges. And so, again, these are some of the issues that contribute to the cause of the delay. So, having a son, again. As with my daughters, I've got to do the research. I've got to look. I've got to understand. And there's some men just have issues with commitment. And that issue of commitment can be very impacted, again, by the trauma, what they've seen growing up. Some men are hesitant about forming relationships or even taking it to the point of marriage because what they were exposed to or what they saw. You talk to a lot of young men and ask them about the relationships that they were exposed to among the adults while they were growing up, and they will tell you that some men say, I didn't know anybody that was married or happily married, or you have some men who will talk about in terms of marriage, the father done left, or you saw domestic violence. All these are contributing factors as to why some people, some men in particular, may be hesitant about moving forward to forming a meaningful relationship. So these things are critical as we begin to really sit down and have a conversation in terms of what I would tell my son. So I would definitely have to take all these things into consideration. But with that being said, if I were to set my son down, here's what I would tell him to look for. And here's a full disclosure, because these are the characteristics that are also found in my daughter and many of the women of some of my friends and how they're raising their daughters. So, number one, I would tell them emotional security. I think it's important. If I had a son, I would tell him to take the time and meet someone. Look at how they handle conflicts, how they handle stress. Emotional security is very important. Right? So you have an opportunity to kind of look and see how that shows up. As a therapist, one of the things I've come to recognize when I work with couples, I'll ask them, has a crisis occurred in your relationship? Has an issue happened where there's been a conflict? Because you really don't get a chance to see how that shows up. And so I would tell my son, if I had one, I would talk to him about taking the time to understand that, because how you handle crisis may be different the way she does. So take the time, I would say to him, and understand how she handles crisis. Number two is that be careful. One of the things that I would say is that you don't want to date a woman that has a war-bound spirit. She's come up in a community where she saw fighting. She's come up in a community or been exposed to adult relationships where there have been fighting. And one of my favorite scenes kind of bringing home is that when you think about The Color Purple, when she came stomping across the grass and she said, "You told Harpo to hit me." She said, "All my life I had to fight." Well, that type of relationship or dealing with someone who has a war-bound spirit as opposed to a spirit of calmness can be challenging. You don't want to be in a relationship where you're competing with your spouse. You don't want to be in a relationship that if you're beginning to exceed, that she then believes that she has to compete with you or hold you accountable for unrealistic expectations. So take the time and make sure in that regard that you're what I call evenly yoked. I think this is absolutely critical. Also, good communication. I would say to a son, it would be critical to be with someone that knows how to communicate. And the greatest characteristic of communicating is being a good listener. Having someone who can listen can help you problem solve, or can give you the attention that's needed. If I had a son, I would say focus on that. A good listener, I'm flipping the concept of communication here. A good listener is one of the most valuable characteristics in any healthy relationship. Why? Because a good listener is someone who's not only listening to what you're saying, they're paying attention to your body language. They're paying attention to your mood swings. A good listener is someone would be able to come to you even though you may not realize that you're going through some things. And so it becomes an important characteristic that if I had a son, I would say look for someone who communicates well and is a really, really good listener. This is a foundation. I'm going to hold tight on that. And next is I would tell my son to find a woman who knows the difference between respect and appreciation. Now, one of the greatest misnomers on the planet, and one of the things that sons, men in general, have been inappropriately trained on, is that respect is the most important thing that you can have in a relationship. Well, I would tell my son that that's a misnomer. You see, you can respect someone and not like them. You can respect someone and that's all you have. I mean, you've been on a job where, that's the supervisor, so you respect them because there's a supervisor. That's as far as it goes. But appreciation, finding a woman that understands appreciation is far more important. Now, here's what I mean by appreciation. That means it's someone that does things for you, not because you've done something for them, not because they owe you. They've done something because it makes them feel good to see the smile on your face, and vice versa. A relationship that is built on appreciation goes much further. I shared once before that what appreciation looks like in my marriage is that when I've had challenges or conflict, or the worst day I've ever had in my life was all melted away as I walked through the door in the middle of a week, and to open up the door and I smell my favorite food, chili beans, hot water cornbread, and fried chicken in the middle of the week, and say to my wife, "Well, what happened? What's going on here?" And she said, "I could hear it in your voice. I knew that you were having a difficult time when you just called to say hello." That's appreciation. Wasn't connected to anything. So being with a woman, if I had a son, I would say talk to her about or educate her on the concept of appreciation. And I would tell my son also that it's important for you to understand that appreciation is far more important than anything in a relationship. And then this one is a little different here. Having a woman and you're taking a closer look at the relationship she has with her father. Yeah, with her father. If she's a daddy's girl, if she has someone who has a great relationship with her father, you see their bond and you see how they communicate, you begin to see these things. It is a great characteristic because believe it or not, a daddy's girl has an understanding of how to appreciate, tend to have a understanding on how to appreciate a man. Tend to also have an understanding of what it takes to support a man because they've been supported. So yes, believe it or not, a daddy's girl is one of the best virtues that you can find in someone, a young lady, because in that regard, it will help her. She'll have an understanding of you. She'll understand the concept of masculinity. She doesn't get offended when someone says, let a man be a man and support him within that. Being raised right, a daddy's girl means that letting a man be a man does not mean requiring her to be less of a woman. It's a beautiful balance. So that I would definitely promote and push that characteristic to look for if I had a son. So these pieces here, I think, is important. Now, I did, in that regard, raise a question to other men and say, if you had a son, what would you tell him to look for in a woman? I surveyed more than 50 men in that process, and I found some interesting things. Many of them were very common to what I said if I had a son, so it was kind of good to know that, I was in the ballpark. But they did some other pieces here that I hadn't taken under consideration. So if I had a son, I would throw these in too, right? Number one, spiritually grounded. It's important to have a woman, to be with a woman that has a strong faith. Religiosity is another thing. So whether she goes to church or not, but someone is spiritually grounded in their faith, because here's why that's so important. When you're going through challenges as you enter a relationship, sometimes then plan A doesn't work, plan B doesn't work, and plan C doesn't work. Being with a woman that says, you know what, the plan D really is the plan A, it's my faith. And sometimes a spiritually grounded woman will have the faith and the strength in terms of that spirituality that she may not possess. So that becomes something that's important. And if you find the right type of woman who really is spiritually grounded like that, she will even help you deal with your spiritual centeredness. So that was a good one that I began to learn from other men. And then a willingness to grow. I did not think about this. But yeah, I'm going to throw this in. I would tell my son to find a woman who's supporting you in that willingness to grow with you. Not a woman that's going to take responsibility to own your growth, because that's your growth and her growth is her growth. So that's not what I mean. But finding a woman that is willing and ready to grow with you, supporting you in whatever it is that you're doing, asking good questions. Right? I'm not questioning, but asking good questions. A woman that's going to grow with you will help you take under consideration things that you may not have considered. This is a really good one in terms of growing with you. And especially if this is someone that you reach the point that they're very serious. And so a couple more that, I'm going to add these to my recommendation to my son. Number one, and, this may sound very value laden, but I'm going to tell you right now, having 3 daughters, I don't care. Finding a woman that comes from what I call a good family. Yeah. Believe it or not, a good family. Because a good family tells you that she has a good network. In my household, my daughters have a lot of play uncles. These are, in our social work profession, we call them fictive kin. These are individuals that have the name. They're my fraternity brothers. They're my colleagues. They're other individuals who step in and who are present to provide good advice. Now, you'll know if she comes from a good family. And here, when I'm saying family, I'm saying a good community as well. So meeting a young lady that comes from a good family where even if a father's not present and she only has the mother, but there's a good community of men, I'm going to tell you, it makes an incredible difference. So again, I don't have sons, but I'm telling you that when I start surveying all these other people, it makes a big difference. She now learns the difference between asking questions and questioning everything you do. It makes a big difference. But now with that one there, I'm just going to pause and say this. With that piece right there, questioning versus asking questions, sometimes that can be interpreted as a result of your own insecurity. But again, I think it's really important that growing with you and someone who is in your life to help talk you through some of your plans, some of your ideas, and walk you through it, and they are optimistic in it. Try it. You know, you really want someone in your life to say, try it, take the risk, not to be reckless because they're in your life to kind of walk you through it, right? And that's important. Now, this other one I didn't take under consideration, but if I had a son, I think it's important. And that's doing an assessment of her past traumas. I think we bring these traumas into our relationships. And so part of that relating process or getting to know someone, nothing that you can rush. You can't rush it by dating them frequently. You can't rush it by being intimate with them on the first, second, or third day, relating in that process of getting to know them. And everyone's got trauma. Right? Everyone has things from their adverse childhood experiences that tend to show up. But what I'm saying is finding a woman and talking with her about how she handles those, that whether or not she can recognize them, right? Whether or not she can pause and realize when it gets in the way. And at the same time, she could be honest with you and you could be honest with her and bring and recognize when your traumas or your past childhood experiences began to show up. This is very critical in the relationship development. This is very critical in a serious conversation that I would have with my son. So if you take all those things under consideration, I would set my son down and I would begin to have that conversation with him. And I would tell my son in closing, I would say, don't look for perfection because you ain't going to find it. You won't find it because you're not perfect. But I will say is focus on the characteristic. Setting my son down and say that she won't just love the man for who you are. She will love the man for who you are striving to be. So setting my son down, having a conversation with him, I believe if he takes these things under consideration, if you take these things under consideration, then you too have laid the groundwork for building a healthy, strong, spiritually grounded relationship. I'm Dr. Gary O. White, and this is just my moment on if I had a son, what I would tell him about dating women.